NATO did not cause Russia to invade Ukraine. NATO did not cause Russia to invade Ukraine. Let me say that one more time. NATO did not cause Russia to invade Ukraine. Oh, but they're expanding to the east. Really? Is that really what's happening? Or are the countries that used to be dominated by the Soviet Union, like Poland and the Baltic states, flee to the warm embrace of NATO to escape what's happening to Ukraine even now? NATO did not cause this. And you can prove that NATO didn't cause this because NATO will not take in a country there's some kind of civil war within the borders of the country, like Ukraine. So since 2014, NATO couldn't have taken in Ukraine. So really, 8 years later, you say, well, NATO is such a threat that we have to invade? No, it's more than that. And this is shameful for anyone to say that NATO has caused this. Let's look at the one big story for today. So Donald Trump just a few days ago was saying, he was blaming NATO for Vladimir Putin's invasion. It's Putin's fault that Putin invaded. Don't blame NATO or worse yet, Ukraine as the victim.
So for 20 years, I heard that NATO, if Ukraine goes into NATO, it's a real problem for Russia. I've heard that for a long time. And I think that's really why this war started. I'm not sure that this war would have started.
No, that's not it. That's not it at all. However, there's no one really in the Republican Party large enough to check him and stop him from saying this kind of stupid stuff. Now, we also see in Britain the same kind of thing is happening, and this is why I had this bee under my bonnet, and we're only dealing with one big story today. Here's Nigel Farage. He's the guy behind Brexit, and he's running for Parliament in the UK right now in the Reform Party, and some bad things are happening here.
It was obvious to me that the ever eastward expansion of NATO and the European Union was giving this man a reason to his Russian people to say they're coming for us again and to go to war.
But you were echoing him.
I was, sorry.
You were echoing him. That's what Putin says.
No. Sorry, I've been saying this actually since the 1990s. Ever since the fall of the wall. But hang on a second. We've provoked this war. It's, of course it's his fault. He's used what
But we provoked the invasion.
Yeah, so the argument that we provoked the war, no, it doesn't stand the sniff test. Okay, let's look at this. Nigel Farage sparks outrage from opponents after saying the West provoked the Ukraine war. Farage, who heads the fast-growing Reform UK political party and was a pivotal figure in Brexit, is seeking to win a seat in Parliament for the first time in the next month's general election. He called Putin's decision to invade Ukraine a consequence of EU and NATO expansion. Now, I don't think that that's fair, especially when they couldn't actually join it. Consequence of EU, like Putin does not like that Ukraine wants to move into the EU. And he doesn't like that at all. There's a contrast between what Ukraine's going to become and what Russia is or has been that is going to become glaring. But I don't think... I know that they couldn't have joined NATO, and so that is a false reason. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reacted to the comments today while speaking to journalists. What he said was completely wrong and only plays into Putin's hands, said Sunak. So at least somebody's challenging him and saying, no, that's not right. This kind of appeasement is dangerous for Britain's security. Former Conservative Defense Secretary Ben Wallace spoke to the BBC Today's program about Farage's comments, where he called the reform leader a bit like a pub bore we have all met in the end of the bar who often says, oh no, if I was running the country, and presents very simplistic answers to actually, I'm afraid, in the 21st century, complex problems. Okay, Labour leader. Now, those are both on the right-hand side of the spectrum. So their reply is going to be stronger than a reply from the left, because you expect the left to say something to the right and vice versa, right? Labour leader Keir Starmer also responded to Farage's comments, calling them disgraceful in an interview with Sky News. But the more powerful one comes from the Conservatives, just because they're Conservatives and more aligned with it. But now there seems to be some kind of breaking between the Conservatives and Reform. It's almost like the Reagan Conservatives and MAGA in the United States, but you have different parties form. It's not just part of one big party like it is in the US. And tell me if I'm wrong. If you're from Britain and you're seeing this and you're hearing what I'm saying, and I'm off in any way, put it in the comments. If I'm right, put it in the comments too, because I'd like to know where how accurate I'm seeing this. Conservatives are desperate to halt the rise of Reform UK, which is splitting their party in two. Rishi Sunak and a string of senior Conservatives have condemned Nigel Farage for claiming the West provoked the Russian invasion of Ukraine amid a growing international Tory battle over how to deal with the Reform UK leader. Tom Nugent, the security minister, went further, telling The Observer, it doesn't matter whether you're Jeremy Corbyn or Nigel Farage. If you parrot the Kremlin's lies, you cannot be trusted with our national security. Let's stop there. If you're saying that NATO caused Putin to invade, you're parroting Putin's lies. If you're listening to someone who is saying that, you're listening to someone who is parroting Putin's lies. You should take that with a huge, whatever they say, from this point forward with a huge grain of salt. Clear blue water still exists between Conservatives and Reform, but Rishi Sunak will balk at a quarter of 2019 Tory voters backing Nigel Farage's party. There's a huge split among the Tories over Farage, part of a wider battle over the direction of the party, which is set to burst into the open the moment the election campaign is over. Some senior Conservatives fear the party could break in two, especially if a new leader opens a door to Farage joining. One former cabinet minister said he now feared a fissure after the election. I think that's the same kind of thing happening in Britain that what MAGA is happening in the US. And you'll see this with populist movements in other countries as well. It's not just unique to Britain and the US. But tell me if this is what is actually happening, if you understand that. The election is less than a fortnight away. We don't use that word. That's a good word, fortnight. Okay, let's keep going. Trump keeps flip-flopping his policies after meeting with rich people. And so this entire article was talking about how Trump, he says one thing and then he meets with some donors and he says something else. Now, the reason that I'm showing you this article is because if he can switch like that on here, perhaps he can switch on Ukraine. But I'm not holding my breath. It's just that he has no real center compass directing him a particular way. Now, there's no one like in the United States of enough stature that can call him out and actually make a dent, like what we see with Sunak and Starmer, who are really taking Farage to task. Here's Sunak.
Nigel Farage has been criticised for comments he's made when he said that the West provoked Vladimir Putin before the invasion of Ukraine. Is he wrong to say that?
What he said was completely wrong and only plays into Putin's hands. This is a man who deployed nerve agents on the streets of Britain, who's doing deals with countries like North Korea, and this kind of appeasement is dangerous for Britain's security, the security of our allies that rely on us, and only emboldens Putin further.
The Farage's comments about Russia and Ukraine are disgraceful. I've always been clear that Putin bears responsibility, sole responsibility, for the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and we have always stood behind Ukraine and supported Ukraine. And so far, we've done it united across Parliament. I've made it my business to ensure that the opposition stood with the government on this issue.
Yeah, and that's the problem that America has, where we're looking for wedge issues against each other. And so, well, Biden's for that, I'm against it. That's not a good way to think through this. We should be thinking, what's the big picture? What is going to happen if Russia actually does topple Ukraine and take over it? What's going to happen throughout the rest of the world? So, okay.
So seriously did we take it, and of course with our NATO allies. And I think anybody who wants to stand to be a representative in our Parliament should be really clear that whether it's Russian aggression on the battlefield or online, that we stand against that aggression. That's standing behind Ukraine, but also standing up for our freedom.
Yeah, the Brits have done this well. Now, I've asked on Twitter, what would you say to a skeptic about what caused Putin to invade Ukraine? I'm looking for serious answers. Please do not say Nazis. And they came up with some good answers here. I always find asking questions work best. They say this is a CIA operation and the Ukraine is a puppet of the US. Okay, well, why did they offer to give Zelensky a safe harbor outside of Ukraine if that's the case? Good way of reasoning with it. He wants Russia to have the land and power of the Soviet Union. I think there's something to that, but to blame it on NATO caused this, that's a pretext that will allow him to, with a straight face, try to reclaim the land that the Soviet Union used to have. to tell them the truth that Putin invaded Ukraine because he lost favor with the government officials of Ukraine. He wants Ukraine to be Belarus and to answer only to Moscow. That's exactly right, spot on. However, the leadership since 2014 has separated itself from Russia, and that pissed Putin off enough to invade. Okay, reincorporated the Soviet Union, or it's multifaceted demographics and wealth distribution, or a land grab, or Eurasian imperialism versus the liberal West. It's a culture war. I think there's an aspect of that as well. And the imperialist legacy, minerals and gas and unfettered access to the sea. Because Ukraine was going to join the EU, overconfidence. That's a big part of it as well, because he did think that he was going to be able to do this in short order, but it's not because of NATO. Okay, last little bit here. Even RFK Jr., who's a third-party candidate in the United States, who's probably not going to be, get anywhere, but he could be a spoiler for one of the two candidates. Even RFK Jr. has repeated the Russian president's claim that he undertook the invasion to keep NATO out of Ukraine and to denazify the country. So with that, we're going to conclude with this. RFK Jr. says this, and I think this is a great answer for all politicians. You should use this as a litmus test. Here we go.
If you read and listen to what I've actually said, and on election day, you think I'm crazy or any of the other disqualifying things that they've said about me, please don't vote for me.
Okay. I mean, I can go with that. All right. Thank you for time, my friends. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.